Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to talk about water control with your watercolors. I'd had a few people asking me about my water containers over the past couple of weeks. Generally, I have a really big divided water bucket. I'll show you here. And it's too big to keep on camera, so I keep it off screen. Also because it's tall and I'm afraid that my camera might focus on that and not on my painting. But a few people had mentioned that they don't know how much water I'm keeping in my brush, and they find it kind of confusing because when they go to paint, they're getting way watery mix or a drier mix and it's not working out for them. So the first thing I want to recommend when you begin to start painting, if you're having any trouble at all getting pigment or controlling your pigment, to go ahead and spritz your set of watercolors with some clear water before you begin, about 5 minutes before you're ready to paint. Now I've just sketched on a very simple landscape here. I've got a line across 1/3 of the way up from the bottom. I've got a little triangle coming out here, and I've got a bumpy line up here about 1/3 of the way from the top to represent a mountain range. Now I want to show you some brushes just so you can kind of expect what you're going to get depending on the different kind of bristles you have. So I have a variety here of flats and rounds, and I have one natural hair brush here. So this is made with an actual animal fur. This one is a synthetic animal fur brush. This is my favorite brand of brushes. It's the Creative Mark Mimic Squirrel. They're a faux squirrel. I use those mostly. And then I have just I've got a Taklon brush here. This is just made from a nylon bristle. Now these three are about the same size, and I'm going to show you the difference from how much water you're going to get with these brushes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll go in first with with just the regular old synthetic, and I'm gonna grab this color. I'll try to remember to grab the same color each time, and that's how much water and paint I get from that brush. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the Mimic. I'm going to get it wet and not brushing it off. Actually, I want to be fair. I don't want to let any of that come off here. Grab that color, and you can see I've got a considerable amount more because this one's more absorbent. It's meant to act like a fur brush. Now on this one, this is a animal fur brush. I'm not exactly sure where I got it. It says Oriental Trading on it. So now I'm just going to set it in there, let it soak up the water, not wipe it off or anything, and just go in there and grab some color. Oh, it's got so much water on it, it was actually filling up the pan, and you can see I've got a lot more water and paint from that brush. So depending on the material your brush is made out of determines how much it's going to hold. So a natural bristle brush is going to be much more absorbent, like a sponge, where a synthetic brush is not going to carry as much. It's like trying to sop something up with a paper towel versus a piece of plastic. So, or a cotton rag versus like a polyester rag. You know, the cotton rag's going to absorb more. So that's the same idea. And also, when you have a softer brush, like a furrier brush, it's not going to hold its point quite as well. You're probably going to, it might be a little harder to control because of all of the extra moisture it holds. And if you don't have it completely full, you're going to end up with kind of feathery lines. So I'm going to wipe this up. I also recommend you keep out like I hate to waste this paint, but I'm not really using this color in this demonstration here, so I'm just gonna sop that up and set it aside. I recommend you have a towel, and this could be like an old t-shirt, anything like that, just setting next to your water dishes. I usually do, again, it's off camera generally. So what I want to do is I want to paint a sky. So I'm going to use this is a Mimic sable, so it's a faux sable. It's a little bit firmer than the squirrel, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wet my sky down to the mountains. So I am incorporating water onto my paper. Okay, so that's the first water that we have to worry about. Now this water I want to apply evenly so I don't have puddles, because when you have puddles, that's when you get the dreaded cauliflowers or blooms. And when I say I want you to wet your paper to an even sheen, that means that when you tip this to the light, you should see it's about the same level of glossiness all over it. Okay, so now I'm going to pick up some color for a wash. I'm going to wet my brush. I'm going to scrape off the excess generally so I don't flood my palette like I kind of flooded it when I went in there with that natural brush. And I'm going to get some ultramarine blue. Now, I'm not adding any more water to my brush, but I'm going to try to sop up all of that color that I can, and I'm going to apply this to the top of my picture. Now, the reason I don't want to add any more water to my brush is because I don't want to disturb the amount of water I have here. So I want a fairly even amount. And I'm going to work it down to the horizon and let it get a little bit lighter as I use up the paint in my brush. Now let's say I realized, oh, I wish that sky was a little bit bluer. So what I'm going to do in that case is, again, I'm going to wet my brush. I'm going to get a little more ultramarine blue. Maybe I'll add a little Prussian blue to that. I'm going to blot my brush though, because my brush has gotten wetter than what I have on my paper. So I'm going to blot off the excess. And I'm going to apply this color to the top. And then, so I don't end up with a weird streak or blossom, I'm going to clean my brush, wipe it off, and then I'm going to distribute that level of moisture by going back and forth right along where I just went. And I'm going to bring that color down a little bit. The key with a smooth sky is to keep it all at the same level of wetness. I wouldn't want to wet my brush and go right in on this, or I would end up with weird like blotches. Okay, so now I have that ombre sky that I want. Another thing you can do is actually just kind of tip it or tap it, and you can help distribute that pigment a little bit. So generally when I'm going in for some water, I'm cleaning my brush in the dirty water, dipping it in the clean, and then I tend to scrape it. Okay, especially if I'm going to be mixing up some color. So I think I'll do some color for my pond here. I know I'm going to have some trees and stuff. So I think I'm going to end up having some, maybe some sap green or some olive green, whichever green you prefer. Have some burnt, let's do burnt sienna. I like burnt sienna. Do that one over there. If you're feeling that you are not getting a vivid enough color, you can go in with a stiffer brush. So like I could use this one, which is a traditional Taklon versus my faux sable. It's just going to give me, it's going to be less absorbent, it's going to pull more color up, but I think this is fine because I sprayed it beforehand, so I really didn't have much to worry about. I think I'll also grab some yellow ochre. I'll scrape off the extra, and or raw sienna, whichever one you like better, it doesn't really matter. This is a pretty color palette. I use this palette a lot, this color scheme a lot. And because I want my water to be fairly smooth and blended, I am going to wet the water area. So this time, I'm not going to brush off. I'm just going to kind of turn it a couple times, let any big drops fall off, but I want to make this area pretty wet, so I'm just going to go ahead and not scrape off my brush. Okay, so whether you scrape your brush off on the side of the jar or you blot it, it just depends on how much water you want to bring over. If you're going to mix color, you're probably going to scrape it. If you're trying to wet a whole background, you're probably just going to let any excess drips fall off, but then you're going to come right over to it. I hope this is helpful and not too simple. So now I'm going to get a bunch of these colors into the water. Now, a lot of times I'll go in, if I know I'm going to need more yellow ochre than I have, I'll just go right in and grab some of that. I'm going to go in. This is a wet into wet wash. Now, this is really wet, so I'm not worried so much about messing it up or having blooms or anything, because everything's going to stay wet enough, long enough for me to do my thing. Let's get a little bit more of that sap green in there. We'll throw in a little burnt sienna where we can see the muddy, shallow bits of this little creek or pond or whatever it is. And just a little bit of blue from the sky. And I'm working on a cellulose paper, so sometimes a cellulose paper can give you a little bit of just a natural blooming. So wetting my, blotting off that extra, and I'm just going to sop up any puddles that I see. Now remember, your paint's going to dry a little bit lighter. Okay, so now I'm thinking, oh, I want to do some mountains here. I really want to make sure that I'm not going to get too much water, so I'm going to leave it dry. And instead of using this brush, which this brush would be fine, I'm going to just play it safe and go with my regular Taklon brush. Now this is not going to be so absorbent, so I'm not going to be able to get too much water even if I tried to with this brush. So I'm going to mix myself up a gray. I'm going to take some burnt sienna here, and I'm going to add it into my my blue and get myself a nice gray. Now, if I'm working from a dry color, I don't always, especially if my brush isn't very wet, I don't always rinse between because I waste a lot of paint that way. So you can kind of keep that in mind. Oops, that was the wrong glue. There's a waste. Generally, if I'm doing landscapes, I work with my studio palette, but I couldn't fit my jars of paint and my studio palette together because it takes up too much space. It's hard to get these 1-inch flat brushes in there. And I'm using Windsor Newton Professional watercolors today. Alright, now I want this to be a little bit more on the blue side. I also want to pull in some of the other blue that we used in the sky, so I'm just going to grab a little of that Prussain, throw it in there. And I'm going to water it down. I'll do that with a spray bottle. And mix that all up. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is hold my brush with a very loose hand, and I am going to start to throw in some of the rocks in my mountain. Now if I touch the sky and the sky is still wet, I'm going to end up with a ruffled or a feathered edge, which isn't really what I want, but if it was mountains further away, that would be perfect. You'd want to do that when it's still damp because you'd want to get that, that kind of ruffled, feathered edge. And I just kind of twist and wiggle my brush around and get these interesting rocky shapes. Now if I use the brush that was a little more absorbent, I mean, you can see how far this one's going. You can imagine how much paint I would have on my brush with that. So now I'm going to clean my brush off and blot it. And I'll probably get a bloom there because I just accidentally set that on my, because normally I'm spread out a little bit more, but I'm trying to keep everything in camera. You can see that it kind of lifted up a little bit in the corner there. I'm going to go with a little bit lighter. I added some water to my brush, picking up a little bit more of that blue. If you think you have too much paint, you can gently blot it. Now I wash my rags out in the kitchen sink with some dish soap because that way I don't have to worry about the paint staining any clothing in the regular wash. Now one of the reasons I'm getting lighter here, you can even add a little yellow ochre to that, is because it's a little bit closer to the viewer, but also I'm going to be painting some trees ahead in front of it, and I want them to be able to stand out. This is just going to be a quick demonstration today. Okay, and since we painted this wet on dry, it's not going to take so long to dry. It's not going to take as long as like the water or the sky to dry. I could speed that along with my heat tool if I wanted to, but my heat tool is not plugged in at the moment, so I am just going to, I'm just going to, you know, go right in. I think it's going to dry enough by the time I get my color mixed. So I'm going to grab some Sap Green, and I'm going to get some more burnt sienna. I'm going to take the burnt sienna, add some of that gray, and I'm going to start making some tree trunks. Hopefully the sky is dry enough to do that too. I'm not worried about that going into the water. I can always turn that into a reflection. Let's bring this one right off the edge of the page. That way we'll have a nice scale there. And I'm just going to pull up some of that color there at the horizon. Give it the impression of like a thicker forest, some shadows, and then that will make sense if we get a little reflection in the water there. I'll bring that right across and let that kind of blend it down. Hopefully not giving us blooms, but it might. Honestly, it might, because we're on a cellulose paper. What I can do is I can wipe this soft brush off. I can kind of pull some of this down. Just got to be careful not to lift up what's underneath. And we can always add more reflections in there later. That's good enough. Okay, now we're going to grab some sap green here. Put in some more tree trunks. Make them smaller as they get towards the center here. Maybe a few little outliers up here. And then you can actually kind of like just tap your brush a few times and give it that evergreen shape. But I wanted to kind of fade off here because I'm going to have a few things coming up from right there. Okay, I'm going to switch over to a round. I'm going to go with this one. This is the one I'm the most comfortable with. It is my number 12 Mimic round. I also like the number 8 round. They're just fantastic brushes. Okay, I'm going to add a little burnt sienna into my sap green. And I'm going to throw in some branches and some foliage. The key is to kind of vary your colors from tree to tree so you get some really interesting variances, so it looks more natural than to just have a bunch of trees the same color. Grab some of these darker colors here in the bottom to help show us some things that are kind of silhouetted and deep in the forest. Remember, your colors dry lighter, so don't freak if it seems a little bright. I like to paint with my brush straight up and down. I hope it doesn't mess up with the focusing on the camera. I like to do that because then it gives me complete control. I can press down more for a wider line, and I can get right on the tip of that brush for a more delicate line. I can even just zigzag and make little treetops that way. And since we went lighter with our mountain stuff in the foreground, not really showing through. Sometimes you need to push the shadows around a little bit. Now another neat thing you can do with some of these brushes, they have like an, it's called an aquarelle handle. That's when they have the clear handles and they've got the bevel on the end, and you can, I put a little deck of cards under there to help things stay level. I like this because with this, when you do a credit card scraper, you usually get a dark line, but when you use the aquarelle end of your brush, you'll get more of a light line. You can almost squeegee your paint away, and I really like being able to do that. You have to be pretty daring with it though, and go kind of quick. Because if you're tentative or you go on the edge of it, you're more likely to get a thinner line. You can also drag out branches, those finer lines. It makes them look a little bit more random and realistic as well. Okay. This isn't too bad. I didn't know I was going to paint. I know I wanted to talk about water control, but I didn't know what I was going to paint. This isn't too bad. It's alright. Okay, another thing you could do, if you do have the credit card scrapers, you can make some rocks, and I think it might be nice to have a few rocks over here where I've got that kind of messy stuff happening there. So I'm just going to hunt down a credit card scraper. I always have a million of them. Old Borders gift card. That store hasn't been around in a while. I'm just gonna... Oh, that's a big border. Ah, Border, get it? Borders bookstore. And in this damp paint, I can scrape some rocks. I know it doesn't look like much now, but it'll be fine. Okay, now over here, I want to get going on this little area. I'm going to actually start right in throwing some of this mixed gray. I'm going wet on dry. Oh, some burnt sienna. Tone that down a little bit. The green will tone down the red. Isn't that lovely? And a little bit of this blue. I like to have an interesting kind of grayish color here. We'll do a few rocks over here as well. Let's start with a little base that we can scrape. And it's okay if these boulders are a little bit bigger because they're closer to the viewer. So it makes sense. So I'll often just kind of scrape some up and then place it down elsewhere. Yeah, I want to have a lot of rocks here. I love painting rocks. Speaking of painting rocks, I actually picked up a bunch of rocks. And I was walking the other day to paint. to paint on. For a project that I've got coming up for Mother's Day. I don't know if I'll share that with you before or after Mother's Day because I want it to be a surprise. And I didn't ruin the surprise because I didn't tell you why I was painting the rocks. I don't think my mother's watching, so I think I'm safe. Okay, so we got some, those will be rocks, trust me, okay? I know you're probably thinking, oh, she's lost it. She's finally gone off the deep end. Those do not look like rocks. They will. Don't worry. That's a fun thing about painting. You can turn it into whatever you want. Just takes a few little dabs and strokes. Only a piece of paper, guys. Don't worry about it too much. I like to make rocks in the water. Pretty shallow water anyway. That's what we had it real murky, so that's fine. Okay, I could paint rocks all day. I probably shouldn't. Okay. Alright, so I want some trees over here. Back to what we were doing with the trees. Let's see, I want to have, let's make us a nice, vibrant, deep green here. Prussian blue and sap green. I'm going to do this one with these with a round brush. Let's do that. That way they'll be all automatically a little different than those. We're starting them off with a round brush. I'm working, my whole shoulder is moving, my whole arm is moving. I'm moving from the shoulder. Do that if you can. If you can't, that's fine. But if you can, if you have the mobility, do that. You're going to get a much better result if you do that. Okay, now I'm going to rinse my brush, grab some fresh water, scraping it off. See, scraping off the extra water. Picking up some sap green. Now I'm dabbing this on so it's going to flow into what I've already done. I want those colors mushing together. I love the look of that. It's so pretty. Grab some more of that color, get that in there. I love it when the colors kind of morph into what we've just painted, like it's morphing down here when it's some yellow ochre. Scrape the extra off. Yellow ochre is a mineral color. It's not going to flow quite as well. You can even see when you're trying to pick it up, it's not as ready to the ready as like some other colors are, some more dye-based colors. Let the colors mix and mingle. Let's put another little guy over here. Tip of the brush for tiny little strokes. Remember, you can use your scraper to connect things if you need to. Use it as a pen. See? I can use it as a pen. I can connect. I can pull some branches out if I need to. You can add some shrubs, grasses, whatever you like. I think I'm going to use the beveled edge here. a few little shrubs growing. Now I'm going to blot the puddle that's happening there, and I'm actually going to wipe the edge of the paper because I'm getting quite a buildup there. Okay. Let that float back. And I'm feeling like I still would like a little bit more yellow ochre, but my yellow ochre was giving me a hard time, right? It wasn't popping up. I wasn't able to reconstitute it like I wanted to, so I'm going in with a stiffer brush. And that's really going to let me dig in there and get that paint. Look how much paint's on that brush. So that's a reason why you might want that, you know, the harder brushes, the golden Taklons. The ones that are, you know, this one's meant for watercolor, but I mean, it could also be used with acrylic. That's the kind of material it is. That's going to help you dig that stuff out of your paintbrush. Now I want some little grasses growing in around these rocks, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm putting in a nice bead with the Sap Green. Now let's see if I can drag it up with the Aquarelle handle here. I can a bit, but I want kind of more fluid stroke, so I'm going to go in with a liner. And this is a Mimic Squirrel liner, so it's got long bristles. You've got to have, it holds a ton of color, holds a lot of paint and water. So I can make grasses for days with this. So you learn a few different techniques, and you can make up any landscape that you like. You learn how to paint mountains, rocks, trees. I'll be coming out with a landscape class, and it will be about how to do these different elements so that you can put them together and create different landscapes. So keep an eye out for that. It'll probably be mid-June. I'm just going to put the things where you want them. Now we're going to want to let this dry, and then when we come back, we will put in our final details of our rocks and finish it up. Okay, I went ahead and dried this with my heat tool. Now we're going to just kind of finish up our piece here. I'm going to start off by taking, you can use whatever flat brush you want. This is a 3/4 inch flat. Honestly, for this size, it's an 8x8. I probably could use a 1/2 inch, would be a little bit better, but I think this is fine. If you feel like this is way too big for you, go ahead and use this flat brush. I'm going to take my sky colors. Remember, we had these 2 blues, but quite watered down. And the reason why is because I want to make sure I can still see what I have underneath there. And what I'm going to do, blot off the extra, is I'm just going to put a few horizontal ripples in here. Because right now it looks like it might be water, it might be meadow, we don't know. So if we put some ripples in here, it's going to definitely give it the feeling of water, but still keep the reflections that we want in there. We still want that color to show through from our trees. There, it clearly looks like it's water. I don't know how straight my lines were, but I don't want to mess with it too much, or I'll just end up lifting what's underneath on this cellulose paper. This is the Fluid Easy Block, not the Fluid 100. The Fluid 100 I like quite a bit, but this one is their cheaper one. And we're going to paint some rocks. I'm going to use my dagger here, my liner. I'm going to grab some burnt sienna and some of the ultramarine blue. Make myself a nice dark. And I'm going to go and put some divisions in between some of these rocks here. I'll practice on these ones back here because they're not as prominent. I'm actually going to go in with this, that flat. Like too much water on there, blot the extra off. And if you find that your paint's not flowing, go in and get a little bit more on there. Now my rock's got a little dark here, so honestly I should scrub out a little bit of highlight. And to do that I need a scrubber brush or a stiffer, like a hog brush or something. I've got these synthetic scrubbers by Menta. These are from Royal Nantical, and you can get them at AC Moore. I don't know if any of the other big box stores are stocking them, but AC Moore does carry them, and they're anywhere from $2.50 to about, I think, $4 a piece. They're very affordable. And see, I can lift that right up and I can get back to the white of the paper if my rocks got too dark. Now, anytime you scrape, you do end up, you know, kind of damaging the paper, so kind of keep that in mind. I want to have a little bit of yellow ochre on those rocks. I want to warm them up a little bit. So I'm just going to take a little bit, really work it out on my palette, and add some of that, maybe a little burnt sienna. Give them a little bit of a difference. And then at the bottom of those, I'm going to go in with the darker color, that burnt sienna ultramarine mix, and darken them at the edge of the water where they would be a little bit darker. The rocks get wet and then they get darker. More blue in there. Carry that behind that tree line. Let it guide the eye back there. Go around this tree to help push that stuff in the background back more. Kind of like you're sculpting around these the foreground cluster of trees there. If you see something that looks like it's a rock, then paint around it, let it be a rock. Use your intuition. And I want to lower that color in the water here, so I'm just going to drag some of it underneath there. Help ground that. I am getting quite a bit of glare as I'm painting here, so I'm trying not to stick my head in the way when I paint that. I also want to lift out a little bit of color on top of these two little rocks here. Scrubby, scrubby, and look how easy that comes up. That's one thing about, you know, wood pulp paper, is it does seem to lift up. Can lift on it easier. I find that regular paper towels work a little bit better than cloth rags for if you're trying to lift something off of, you know, you want to blot something off. Yeah, for whatever reason, paper towel just is a little bit more absorbent. I'm going to let that dry before I try to go around them at all, but I'm going to come up here. Again, I'm going to lift. I'm going with my lifting scrubbing brush. Not everywhere, because I love some of the texture and color I'm getting on some of these rocks. But I do want to bleach out a little bit of them. And you get sort of interesting textures from previous scrapings that you did with the credit card scraper, that's why I love that technique so much. And I mean, really, I don't feel like I need to do much to that, because I feel just like lifting and having that leftover texture really did a lot. So I think that I will add a little bit of dark right behind that rock to kind of shadow it. And I try to go from what's on my palette already as much as I can, because it's going to match. I know it's going to go, and nothing's going to be discordant. We haven't used many colors. You know, we've used two blues, we've used a green, we've used a brown, we've used a yellow. I'm actually going to use my liner here so I don't get too much of anything happening in here. Throw in just some branches, some scraggly branches and shrubs. Lost and found. You don't want to, you don't need to put everything out there. People can make up the rest. You just need to give suggestions of what's what. Like I did the whole trunk, I didn't need to do that whole trunk. That's unnecessary. And variety, within those colors that you've already picked. Get some variety in there, some little branches peeking out. As they do, it's always, very overgrown and random near rivers. Always got these weird little shrubs popping up. They've somehow made it through the full of spring floods in the winter. Hope you can see. Hope this is big enough. I want to have those water containers in there for you. Okay, let's see, is that dry yet? That's pretty dry. I'm going to go back to the liner. Now you could use what's called just a small round brush or a spotter. That's just a small round brush. It'll do the same thing as this, but that's going to hold a lot more paint because it's got the longer bristles. So you can use whatever you want. This, if you're having a hard time controlling the rigger or the liner because of the long bristles, you may find you prefer like a spotter or a small round. It really depends. If I know that I just want to make sure they don't alter anything too much, I'll go with the spotter, because you just can't get into too much trouble because you can't carry that much paint. But generally I prefer to use a bigger brush. Warm up some of these rocks here. Especially warm up rocks that are closer to the viewer, nearer the bottom of the horizon. Or the bottom of the paper, rather, I mean. Because those warmer temperatured colors would come towards the viewer more. So often I'll put pinks in the closer rocks and purples and turquoises in the further away ones, and it will just give you a little bit of interest, as long as your values are good. Like I could do, let's see what blues, let's grab some of the blues over here. I could do some blues in those, but since we have blue in the water, it's kind of harder for it to stand out. So many colors. And I think I'll just throw in some this kind of mixed teal that we made around the rocks. That will help define them too, if you can darken the water around them. So there might not be much you can do to the rocks, but you can darken around them a little bit. And it always dries a little lighter. It can be a little scary when you go and put that darker color in there, but oftentimes it's just what you need. You just need a little bit. You need to push that depth and that contrast to make other parts seem more bright and vibrant. There, now those little rocks are just sticking out of the water. And I think that's pretty much all this needs. I like to hold it up at an angle because of the glare. So if I have wet spots in here and it's glaring, it's difficult to tell what needs to be done. Put a little bit of texture in some of these rocks. I like the liner for doing the rock textures because you get kind of a random pattern. You'll get like very craggy lines that look like breaks in the rock. And I like that. I think it looks more natural. You can also like spatter a little bit on the rocks if you want to. I use an old toothbrush for that. Now, water on the toothbrush. Oops, I got a hot glue string on that one. Goodness, that's a mess. So you want to wet the brush, you want to tap off the extra, and it does need to be, it needs to be thin enough that it, you know, the toothbrush can absorb it, but you don't want it dripping, because if it's dripping off there, it's going to be too much. And you can always test it on, like, let's test it on a paper towel here. You know what? Well, I'll just set that over like that. So yep, that's a good speckle. I like that. So I'll just give it a little light spraying there, and that'll give me a nice little texture. And you could put a couple birds if you want to in the sky. That would be a good time to use a little round brush, because you're not going to end up with an uncontrollable amount of color there. You want to mix something nice and dark so you have kind of a silhouette. So I'm going to do, again, my burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Kind of like a heavy cream consistency, because you don't want it to, go out of control. I'm going to wipe off the metal part of my brush because you don't want water up there. For water control here, you want your brush fairly dry. And let's I like to look for some place where I might have already put a spatter accidentally. And that's kind of how I decide where I'm going to put birds. It's like, okay, what have I messed up? Where have I dropped some paint? And then I go from there. But there you can see the finished painting, and I'll take a still shot of it as well. Set it out like that so you can hopefully see it a little bit better. And I thought that was a lot of fun. Hopefully that helps you understand your brush control a little bit better, your water control a little bit better. And it all comes down to practice, honestly. I think that's why you take it for granted after you have been, painting for years. You don't even think about it because it comes down to practice, and that's something that you will just instinctively know the more you paint. So practice, 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 have fun. I hope you try this. I'll have a still shot on Instagram and on my blog if you want to just blow that up and look at it. It's kind of an imaginative landscape, so I don't really have a photo to share with you, but thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.